Tanium's Discover module is a customer favorite because of all the unknown devices it finds on your networks. We'll find out how it works and how to tune it for the best results in your environment on today's Tanium Tech Talk. Welcome to part 2 of our Tanium Discover overview. We're going through with Smee Nash King, who's walking us through all the basics you need to know to get up and running with Discover. And a lot of this is maybe not so basic as well. So if you're a Tanium admin, you've been doing Tanium for a while, you'll probably pick up some tips here because there's so many newer features we've released in this module over the time, especially if you've had it for a while. So I'd encourage everyone to walk through this content, even if you're new or if you're an experienced Tanium admin. I think you're going to find some cool tips here. So here we are now. We're going to continue. This is part 2 of our session here on Learning Discover.
So let's move on to my favorite, labels. Labels are how you take the data from Discover and make it into usable information. An immediately useful label to almost every Tanium customer is lost interface. This does a little bit of math, and at roughly the 26-hour point since something was last managed, if it is still being discovered on the network, you will see it being labeled, and you can configure a connection in Connect to send you an alert so that you can then go out and bring it back under management. Super useful. In this case, you can see that our demo environment is pretty neat and tidy, and we only have 5 endpoints that are lost. For our on-premise customers, you can take a label like this into Tanium Client Management and set up an automated recurring installation job so that it will automatically deploy the Tanium client on a schedule that you set to endpoints so long as the necessary ports are open.
Yeah, so what you're saying here with lost interfaces, it means it's lost in the world of Tanium. So Tanium was managing it. We had an Tanium client installed. Then when we're scanning, we're now finding an IP and a MAC that at one point was answering on the Tanium port, but now it's not answering on the Tanium port. So either the Tanium client's busted, which is kind of rare, or somebody's actually removed the client from that, and then we want to get it back under Tanium management. So that's self-propagating.
Yeah, specifically, the client in question is no longer answering the Discover managed interfaces saved question. So that's how you get things marked as managed. And this is specific to, we know it last talked to the Tanium server and answered that question 24 hours ago. And it was last seen on the network in the last 4 hours. Typically, it takes about 26-ish hours for the notification to pop. You could modify this. Just going to pop in here real quick and use this as an example of the kinds of things you can do with a label. So this label is set up to retain the interface as well as apply a label and send a notification. You have to mark things as a notify label if you want to be able to send a notification using Connect. You can mark things as unmanageable. Say if you find some particular OT or a printer that you know for sure you don't want to try, you don't want to even consider as potentially manageable, or you know for a fact is not manageable, you can mark it as unmanageable using this automated label.
Or let's say we just did a migration from Xerox to Ricoh printers, and anytime we see a Xerox printer pop up, they shouldn't be any more left in the environment, but I want to know about it if one shows up, something like that, right?
Yep. And we actually have some labels in our label gallery that can help with that. Although if you want a notification, yes, absolutely create a specific label. If you just want to ignore stuff, through working with some of our largest customers, we've put together a bunch of labels that look like this and have hundreds and hundreds of manufacturers listed in them. In order to download those, you're going to go to the Discover overview. You're going to click on the question mark. You're going to click on Discover Label Gallery. And then you see this collection of labels for new deployment or POC. You're just going to download this JSON file, and then you're going to import it within or from the labels page within Discover. Oh, I do have permission. So I would just click on this import label, drag the JSON file here or browse to it, and then boom. You can also export all of your labels. So if you are modifying one, but you want to keep a record of what it used to be, you can just check mark and export, and there you go. You have a JSON file. This is also great if you're one of our customers who has multiple Tanium environments. You can make a label one place, you can ship it off to your buddy or take it yourself if you're an administrator of the other environment and import it. And there you go. It's great.
So these labels then, so we've talked about the Tanium clients are looking around their neighborhood watch and they're reporting back to these questions. Okay, that we saw the schedule on the front page. It's asking the questions. It's getting back the things we found in the environment. And then when it's processing that data, it's looking through all these label rules and adding the labels. Is that right?
That's correct. And you can apply multiple labels to a given endpoint, although some of them conflict. If you try to put a retain label on there, but then an ignore label or a purge label is processed later on, the ignore or purge takes precedence. So if something's been purged, it's gone. This is the only way that things will get deleted from Discover. We do not delete things ourselves. It is always done with a purge label. You can have whatever retain labels you want applied to something, and it doesn't matter if it's set to ignore it or if it's set to purge.
So what would be an example of where we would want to purge something from the environment?
Please do not keep your Discover database to the point where it doesn't delete things in for, I don't know, a year and a half. That is how your 35,000 endpoint environment becomes a 800,000 interface environment, which, is not helpful when you're trying to find things. We typically recommend either a 7-day or 30-day purge label. We do provide a purge label by default now. Longtime users of Discover will remember when that didn't exist. And it'll be basically 30 days. You can see here we've got a whopping single interface that needs to get cleaned up.
So notice the date there says last seen 30 days ago, right? So this is not an active device on the network. We're not losing any relevant data because that last scene is going to get updated. So for an example, you have a corporate lobby where vendors are coming into the company. I've been one of those vendors, right? I show up on your network as a guest. I'm there for a presentation, and I'm not back for 6 months. You don't need the IP address of my iPhone or my other device on your inventory, really.
Yep. And in that case, you could do something like last seen, I don't know, 1 day or older than 1 day. Click apply. And then you could do another, making sure that this is set to and, because we're matching 2 conditions here. IP address is what we're calling this here. And then this can be a specific IP address, or it can be a range, such as the subnet for your guest Wi-Fi. And you can just tell it, clean up my guest Wi-Fi, and say this is 192.168.86.0/24 because we're using Google Nest. This will update. In this case, I don't have a match. One cool thing is when you are editing your labels, you get a preview of what it's going to look like without it actually doing anything. And it's worth noting that the notify, promote, ignore, and purge actions will not happen until an import takes place, which again is automated in cloud and automated on premise too, but it can be triggered manually. One thing to keep in mind with promote, this is only really necessary at this time, as of this podcast, if you are trying to use Discover labels to target remote authenticated scans in comply. And you must have a MAC address and it must be an unmanaged device. We have a default promote label that has a few more conditions than that. Let's see if I can get back there. Nope, there it is. So, nope, we modified it in this environment. So there is a default promote label that you should see on on install of Discover that has a few more conditions, such as requiring a host name. So if you've got something where you don't have a host name, create an additional promote label, and then you'll be able to target it with comply and do a remote authenticated scan.
Yeah, so that's where Discover and Comply can both use the satellite capabilities. And so I'll refer you to our docs page for more information on that.
Yes, please. And if you need assistance with setting it up and you can't get it with the docs, you've always got Tanium support. One cool thing to mention with Discover, you can create manual labels, and then you can create automatic labels that target things with the manual label. This is helpful if you have a specific interface that you want to purge. You just create a manual label that's called, like, I don't know, purge this now, apply the manual label, and then have an automated purge label that targets that purge this now label. It enables you to not have to create and then delete later a purge label that targets like something by host name or IP address. It's a lot more user-friendly.
Okay, so let me think about this. It's a two-stage label kind of strategy. So I've got one label that just says, if it says purge now, just whack it. But then I've got multiple other labels that could apply purge now, depending on, let's say I'm trying to get rid of VNC viewer and I'm looking for the port or something like that.
This is more of a manual process. You would go into interfaces, you would select one, and then you would choose add label. And this right here, this is a list of manual labels. You probably notice that we have a lot more in the regular label screen. This is only manual labels. Basically, we allow you to target manual labels with your automatic labels so that you can go in here and like label 3 things and then take some other action with them.
Oh, nice.
So labels, major way to get information out of your environment. You can make friends sometimes by, say, identifying network equipment and sending a notification out through Connect to, I don't know, your network team or your security team if certain things pop up where they should not be. I would probably use manufacturer and maybe open ports in that case. And then you can just be like, hey, this looks sus or suspicious. Maybe you want to do something about it. You can also add information by using locations. Locations are the way that you provide permissions within Discover as well. So permissions in Discover are all about what do you have permission to see? What are you allowed to look at? If you have administrators in Kansas City, but you don't want them to be able to see what's happening in DC, then you would assign locations to them on a user level. This is not supported in personas at this time. So you would assign permissions to them to be able to look at these locations in Discover, and you would be good. This does take a little bit of care and feeding at most organizations, especially large organizations, where they spin up and spin things down or randomly re-IP everything because they realized they were using 192.168.1.0/24 somewhere, aka the subnet you find on about a third in my experience, of home network devices. You can get kind of fun here. The only two required columns are network and NAT IP. You can make these other columns whatever you want. I have a customer who uses a site code because they know exactly where those sites are located. And then they add things like site code building floor VLAN. It gives them a way to associate that logical layer with where those devices should be physically located. Obviously, that one takes close cooperation with your network team because they got to tell you what's there. If you are the network team, congratulations, you get to cooperate with yourself. If you have the same private subnet in use at multiple locations, that's where NAT IP gets helpful. Say you had this 10.880.0/24 at a bunch of sites, but they're all going to have different public IP addresses because of how IPv4 works. You can't use these addresses on the public internet. So then you get those NAT IPs and you combine them, and Shazam, Discover knows how to say, well, this one's in Kansas City and this one's in DC.
Which is a big deal because I've run into multiple customers who have duplicate IP schemes, like especially like mergers and acquisitions, or, different companies, come together, or different divisions of companies that were independently managed. And now they're going to a centralized IT model. And they realize, oh, wait, we've got overlapping IP schemes. So that NAT address can help there.
Yes. When you are setting up locations, it's important to realize this is a comma separated value file within Tanium. We give you an example of what it looks like. And we talk about how, say here, they're showing one location is the parent region, and then the next is a child. If you have a layer further down, such as, say, a VLAN, that is used at multiple locations, you will actually see that reflected when you look at the interfaces when they're sorted by location. It'll say something like Mexico 2, after saying like North America, Mexico, and then it'll like break that out so that you know where things are. So this is just a CSV. We give you the option to download a template. When you import new labels, it will overwrite whatever you had before. If you are modifying it, click export first, please. Click export first. But it's really simple to just download it and modify it. It's a CSV. I mean, it's not that hard. A lot of stuff with Discover legitimately are not that hard. You can just get into a lot of nuance about the things you find and your goals. We talked about some of our use cases earlier on, like finding new things to manage with Tanium, finding things that shouldn't be on your network, tracking deployment projects for devices that you can't manage with Tanium. All of these things are nuanced, but they're not necessarily hard.
So Nash, this has been a wonderful tour of all the core features of Discover. And I'm glad we're recording this because I know there are a lot of, especially new customers or customers where they've got a new Tanium admin and they need to learn how does Discover work, right? So this is great stuff. One thing I'd like you to show folks is we've talked about some of these notifications and things like that would go over to Connect module. Show us what would this look like from the Connect module side. If I've got some things I've got a new interface that pops up, I want to send an email to somebody. How would I do that?
Get to connect. Navigate the normal way. Click on connections. I'll just create a new connection. Walk us through it. So we're going to call this one Lost Interfaces. And then we're going to choose our source. There are actually two different sources that you can use with Discover. So one Discover source you can use to send just reports of different, basically large reports of the interfaces that you've got. You can see here, we can send all of them, managed, unmanaged, unmanageable, and just unlabeled, labeled, and ignored. These are kind of stock. You can't pick another thing to report on from here. So when you want to get a Connect job that tells you about a specific notify label, that's when you go to event. We give you two different categories here. These are all related to Tanium created labels, or in this case, we just applied a label. Congrats, go look at it. For many of you, all labels will not be too useful. New unmanaged interface, that might be very useful, might be really relevant to your end goal of getting Tanium deployed into your environment as holistically and quickly as possible. This is also where we give you easy mode on lost interface. You just click the button and set up your destination as you normally would and hit go. If you want to do something based off of a label you've configured, then you pick one here. In this case, I'm going to choose ban device. And then you go down and you pick your columns. We give you a lot of options. I recommend pruning this. You typically want to just know maybe last discovered, scan profile. Maybe if you're trying to monitor what things are discovered by a satellite, you would tell it to include the satellite name and direct connect ID. A lot of this is not going to be directly useful and may cause you to feel like you are drowning. So please do not make yourself drown, but super useful, especially for your security team or your Tanium admins. And really, I would recommend leveraging your notification labels. So I'm good.
Well, Nash, thank you so much for this tour of Discover. And this has just been a great intro about what is Discover, what are the things I need to consider configuring, like locations, for example. I mean, that sounds super handy for folks with multiple sites where they need to track these devices across those environments for security reasons or for ops reasons, right? There's lots of cases there. So as we wrap up then, how would you summarize all this for our audience? Or are there any takeaways that you have for them? What are your top recommendations, for example, for somebody who's new to Tanium Discover?
Top recommendation is try to use NMAP. Check in with your network team before you do so. Ask them if they use dynamic ARP inspection. If they are, you probably don't. You want to go with a ping scan so that you don't make the network team unhappy. Otherwise, set up a scan, look at the data. There are so many people who've got useful data kicking around in Discover, and they just don't look at it. I'm begging you, please use it. You can get your Tanium out there so much more easily, especially when you're doing expansion. And you can make sure stuff stays managed, and you can find weird things that you don't want to have. These are all really valuable and will improve your security posture and make your life better.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's great advice, right? If you've got the data, you need to look at it. And that's where those labels can really help to surface the most important things to the top of the pile. So Nash, thank you for joining us on Tanium Tech Talks today. And folks, as always, we have a number of resources for you. So if you check the show notes below, we've got a link to docs, a link to some really handy community articles that will go into more details on explaining some of these use cases that we've talked about in this episode. Also, there's a link to a previous episode 29 where we talked specifically about the Discover satellite capabilities and go deeper on that. So please avail yourself of those resources. And as always, if you have any questions, reach out to your Tanium account team or Tanium support. We would love to help you maximize your use of Discover in your environment. So there you have it, folks. There's our overview of the Discover module. And until next time, Go-Tanium.